in Billings, Montana for a year and a half while my future husband, Michael, who would eventually become my ex-husband, finished his undergraduate education. Michael was living in Montana while I was finishing my undergraduate degree in California. Because he was half Crow Indian, his education was nearly free in Montana. It was a gift from the government in exchange for putting his people on a scrap of real estate that the government didn't really want. It was Michael's job to procure adequate sanitary housing before I arrived. I was interested in basic features like potable water and heating for winter. I knew the task exceeded his scope of skill when he called to ask how I felt about mobile homes. Like a trailer? I asked. There was a lot of uncomfortable silence that followed this question before we both decided it was best for him to keep looking. The world is now obsessed with tiny living, pinning adorable dollhouse trailers on their Pinterest boards and posting articles on Facebook about life off the grid in 350 square feet. The mobile home experience Michael was trying to sell was pre-Pinterest and would have been a Facebook meme of a darker variety. It wasn't a fashionable choice for people with a choice. It was the only option for people who didn't have the luxury of choice. I assure you, no one would be chirping with unbridled enthusiasm about living small if that meant a 1970s mobile home with all the charming design of an era that fancied avocado green and sunburst orange. When I asked Michael if we could go to the Gap to pick up some new jeans, he informed me that that would require driving to Colorado, but reminded me that there was a Sears nearby. It was official. I was in uncharted territory. Why don't we just jump in our covered wagon and go into town and get some gabardine at the general store, and I'll make myself some nice dungarees, I replied. The limited economy at the time in Montana did not allow for vast opportunity, so I took the job that paid the most as one of the managers of a rent-a-center. It was the equivalent to legal loan sharking. I was a trailblazer, the first woman they had ever hired. I mean, I wasn't exactly Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Norma Ray, but all 5 of us were experiencing something new, a first. I worked 60 hours a week with 4 Montanan men. They were the type of men who referred to themselves as true Americans, implying that others were some lesser or knockoff version. Every evening, the theme to Top Cops, which would later just be called Cops, would boom through all 28 TVs, announcing our evening ritual where I would sit with the boys on couches that we hoped to rent to future customers. Just hearing the Bad Boys theme made me want to learn how to shoot a gun just so that I could kill myself. I was spending most of my life with 4 men who were like characters in a book I had never read. I'm sure they held strong opinions about me as well. I wore impossibly red lipstick, talked about wanting to live in Japan, and never killed my own food or even shot a gun. I was an absurd cartoon character that had no practical value in the world. We drove a van around town in pairs of 2 to deliver furniture or park outside of a rundown house or apartment. We were repo men, demanding a microwave or sofa because a payment was 4 weeks in arrears. I repossessed things from single mothers like my mother. I walked into homes where kids were eating bowls of cereal for dinner with no milk. I knew these people. They were the kind of people I grew up with. I needed to make money and pay back student loans. That's what I told myself, living on a diet of shame and self-loathing. Our billing system operated by the week, not the month. Our clientele were people who wanted things like washers and dryers and TVs and sofas, but had no credit, no money, and no hope. Thus, our thriving business was born. It was a rent-to-own model whereby clients would make weekly payments with interest rates that could choke a horse and land an average citizen in prison for extortion. People paid for weeks and weeks and weeks until they could no longer afford to pay, and then we would repossess the dining room set they were eating dinner on, or the television their children were watching cartoons on, and start all over again. Ironically, our customers always returned. It wasn't loyalty. We were the only gig in town that would extend any form of credit. A guy we took a refrigerator from on Friday would be back on Tuesday with cash in hand. No hard feelings. We once repossessed a microwave from a man named Dale who fancied himself a painter. He invited us in by yelling from his recliner, which he rarely moved from due to some injury. He was painting a watercolor scene on a tablet in his lap that he would occasionally flick a cockroach from. Roaches dripped from the ceiling like a horror film. My coworker Benny looked at me with ferocious determination. I suggested we leave it. He, of course, was all about the principle. We were going to take back our property. After dusting the roaches from Benny's back, I told him that I would wait in the van. He brought the roach motel back to the store, which was filthy, with exploded pepperoni Hot Pocket debris and popcorn. The microwave sat in the back alley of Rent-A-Center for weeks before eventually finding its way to the dumpster. A mere tap of the microwave surface would have roaches scattering from the box in waves. The boys spent all of their downtime between episodes of Cops and television repossession tapping the microwave to see how many roaches would evacuate while they coughed and smoked their 9th cigarette of the day. We pondered endlessly about the volume of roaches a microwave could contain, and finally concluded that it was roughly in the neighborhood of 87,000. Jay and I talked about his pregnant wife, who he felt weird about having sex with in the beginning, but got over pretty quickly. Charles married a woman who wouldn't work and spent all of his money, but she was so beautiful he didn't seem to mind. And Benny had survived some kind of cancer that he didn't talk about much, but said enough to let us know how grateful he was to be working. They hassled me like they hassled each other. No better, no worse. When they started telling racist jokes and I asked them to stop, they stopped. And 3 months into the job, when I told them that I was leaving to accept another job, they were disappointed to see me go. I landed a job as an adjunct professor teaching ESL. I had to take a second part-time job at Pier 1 Imports to make ends meet. I got the job as an adjunct by offering to work for free. I wanted to accumulate some experience to position myself to teach abroad in Japan. I ended up earning a small stipend, which seemed like a great accomplishment at the time. By small, I mean something that would allow me to buy a sandwich every other week. The Pier 1 Import staff consisted of 2 women and 5 gay men. I was a professor by day with my own office, and by night I sold candles and throw pillows that were probably made by children chained to workstations in some far-off land. This might be what those in the corporate world would call a lateral move. I made fast friends with one of the managers, Hank. Hank was smaller than I was, smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and had the worst teeth I've ever seen in a mouth. Hank's mouthful of yellow rocks did not taint his impression that he was the hottest gay man alive, and probably the toughest man I've ever met. In a voice that sounded like he ate gravel for breakfast, he would say, "Find me a man who wouldn't want some of this." He was ferocious and told me about how he went downtown once dressed as a woman. A big old drunk guy started hitting on him. Hank tried to explain to the guy that underneath his Dolly Parton wig and tube top, he was a man. The guy threatened to kill him and was about to when Hank took off his stilettos and nailed the guy with a 1-2 to the head and ran like hell. I totally adored Hank. I had spent my whole life in Northern California, where no one seems to care all that much about things like the shade of your skin or who you happen to love. So I was certain I had misunderstood when someone asked me if the ethnic man they saw me with was my husband. I had previously thought we were all ethnic, but apparently that phrase implied non-white. Racism cut sharply in both directions, as I learned when I visited the reservation with Michael, where he insisted on escorting me to the bathroom so that the women from his tribe didn't use the opportunity to express their indignation and beat some sense into me. No matter where I went, people would ask me where I was from, as if I had an accent or wore weird European shoes that identified me as an outsider. In a sea of Wrangler jeans and boots, I was like that Sesame Street game. One of these things is not like the other. With my hats and Ray-Ban cat-eye sunglasses, I was a white girl from California living in Montana married to a Crow Indian, teaching English to Japanese students, and working at Pier 1 Imports with a couple of hard-ass women and 5 gay men. I was a foreigner in a foreign land, and like expats throughout the world and throughout history, I found my band of misfits and myself a home for a while.
That's VAMP first-timer Annmarie Houghtailing.